Hey there. Thanks so much for joining me today. I am talking about how we can reliably get our percussion kits, particularly custom percussion kits like the one I set up in my last live stream, set up on future projects or even old projects in Dorico. And this introduces a challenge which I think many people have faced across the spectrum with instruments, expression maps, percussion maps, all of this configuration. If you've ever tried to build a percussion map or an expression map or set up a custom instrument or set up a custom percussion kit, then you have encountered this situation where it's unreliable or inconsistent about how it's available in future projects or other projects. So you might, create a great jazz drum kit, let's say, and you want to, after you put all that work into it, you want to use it in an old project. Maybe you wrote an old project a year ago as a jazz track. You've invested in a much nicer, more updated, more complete and nuanced jazz kit. You've put in a couple hours to build your percussion kit and your percussion maps. Now you'd like to go to that project from a year ago and gussy it up with this new kit, right? So that's the kind of thing that can happen. And it can be a little bit confusing. So today what I'm going to talk about is what are the elements of getting this to work, and then how does it work? How do these steps actually sort of come together? We're going to be talking about the library manager. We're going to be talking about how we get instruments, percussion kits, and percussion maps between projects, and hopefully give you some insights into, I think, how the developers at Steinberg are hoping that we will work with this. So I'm going to jump into my desktop here. This is the project that we were on in my last live stream. So I had set up this one percussion kit. It's called Taiko HST. It's got a bunch of instruments in it, as you can see, like so, and I can create whatever rhythmic pattern that I want with it. This is a sort of rather advanced full taiko ensemble that's great for trailer music or sort of big hits style music that uses taikos a lot. And so I've set up a really, I'll kind of give you a 1 minute walkthrough of how this works. Up in the library menu, if you look at my instrument families, I've actually created an instrument family called Taiko HST. Each of these instruments is in that family, and then also each of those instruments is a custom instrument that I created. And within each instrument, I also have created, let's go to the library and instruments and just look at one example. I have got multiple playing techniques configured in the way of noteheads. Okay, so my last lesson or live stream was really all about how do you build this kit and how do you go about planning it so that it's a reliable and predictable experience. Now that I've got this kit, let's say I wanted to use it in another project. What are the steps? So I'll bounce back to this view here because this list over my shoulder, instruments, kits, and endpoints are really important. So I've created custom instruments. That's one thing I need to port over. I've created a kit. That's one thing I need to port over. I've created a percussion map. That's another thing I need to port over. And in a perfect world, this would be as simple as maybe creating an export, importing it into my new project, loading my playback template, and I'm done. That has worked for me in the past, but not reliably. Here's what I've learned is a very important aspect of what's happening behind the scenes. It's obscured from what we can see. And I'm going to walk you through this problem. It is the fact that Dorico identifies instruments using sort of internal instrument IDs, and that can be very tricky. So let's go ahead and look at my instrument collection on this here. So let me load this up. This is the play menu. I'm looking at my instruments. And one of the nice things about adding all of them to my own custom family is I can just select the family there, and now I can look at them all here. So we can see here as we move through all my instruments, one thing you'll notice is that I have them all starred down here, right? So this means that it's going to show up in future projects that I open up. It will not necessarily show up in past projects. I'm going to show you how to deal with that by exporting and importing a library file. But I've created all of these in the instruments. Each one has its own set of note heads, and you can see that when I open it up in the this is one of my favorite things about working with note heads, is that when you open it up in the key editor, you get this nice display on the left-hand side that makes working with complex kits very intuitive, because I can actually see exactly which articulation and which hit is being applied to each MIDI note. So that is why I use note heads. That's all wrapped up. The note heads are all wrapped up in a kit. So one thing that you can do to export this kit and make sure that it's importable, if that's a word, is you can just come into setup mode. You can right click here, and you could actually, I think what you want to do is go to this 3 little dots and go edit percussion kit. That brings up a window where you can export just the kit. Okay, so exporting this kit, go ahead, and I've already done that. I exported this taiko HST, and you'll see that it creates this Dorico lib. That's going to contain not only the instruments in this kit, but also the note head configuration. So it's the best sort of way. This Dorico lib file is like the most robust form of doing this. So we still want to have it implemented in our playback template as an endpoint from that other project, from that source project. And if you are familiar with my channel, from previous lessons, one of my strong recommendations to Dorico users is to have projects that are designed specifically to build endpoints. So endpoint projects, you actually create a Dorico project, you configure all the instruments just the way you want, and then you export an endpoint, and then you can create a playback template from those endpoints. And I've done videos on that workflow. The nice thing about that workflow is that when you want to go back and edit a particular endpoint, instead of having to build your whole playback template from scratch, you can just go back to that one project that's for that one endpoint. And it's not designed to play music or anything. It's just designed to help make sure that you've got an editable, revisable, updatable place where you can rebuild that endpoint anytime that you need to. So that's what I'm essentially done here. I have this endpoint project, which is for my hybrid percussion, and this instrument is in my hybrid percussion endpoint. So we are ultimately going to want that endpoint to be part of our playback template. But we also want to have a Dorico lib file. Now there's another way that we can get a Dorico lib file, and that is from our, let me jump back into my desktop here. From the library menu, you can actually go down here and you can go export library, and you can just export the whole thing. This is just going to basically export a library of everything from this project. Playback templates, instruments, playback techniques, all that sort of stuff, right? So I could come in here and I could create a new folder called, what is this, libraries? I'll call it project libraries. All right, and I could just call this taiko project, endpoint project. Okay, so when you have these lib files, and let's see if I've got a file over here, live streams, boom, boom. So you'll see once again, the file that it's created is called a Dorico lib file. That's what we get for the kit. That's what we get for the percussion map if you export it. The project here, this endpoint project, is actually just a Dorico project. But when you export a kit, or you export a percussion map or expression map or a project library, you get this Dorico lib file. And what does that contain? Well, it kind of depends on the scope of where you did the export from. But if you come down to your library menu, go to Library Manager, then you will see all the different stuff that is in a library. So all of these things are in a library. Now, I have done videos on the Library Manager before. The Library Manager is your best friend as far as porting any kind of data from one project to another. Now, a relatively straightforward way to do this is to go ahead and actually grab the project. I'm going to grab my So this is grabbing the source project, the project that I know has my kit set up in it just the way I like. I'm going to grab that project, and it actually becomes a reference here. So now it's this library manager window is telling me, well, compared to that project, of course, everything's in sync because I have that project open, right? But if I were to close it, just take a minute for it to close and unload the instrument. But when I close it like this and I say go to create a brand new project, I'm just going to create an empty project. And then from here, if I go up to the library menu and I go to library manager, Dorico project, and once again, I'm going to go to my live streams folder here, to my endpoint project. Now you'll see that it's not all blue check marks. Some of it's showing me that there's inconsistencies. And particularly there's inconsistencies in my percussion instrument data, percussion kits, and percussion maps, as well as playback techniques. But I think these three percussion items are really the issue. So when we look at percussion instrument data, what you're going to see is that you have these weird IDs, right? All of these strange IDs. These are the IDs that I'm talking about. They're not visible really to us. And if they're not synced up, then your playback template isn't going to sync up. So what I would tend to do here is just bring all that stuff over from the project. That's one way I could do it. I could literally just click these signs. I don't want to do that because I want to preserve this project in its current format to show you another approach. But you could just click these. They become, I think, little green checkboxes, and then you have to hit apply, and it actually just kind of sucks all that information from the other project into your current project. But another option is from the library menu, you can go, actually maybe it's from, is this where you'd come to? It might be that I would use the library file actually in a different context. So maybe actually the best thing for me to demonstrate, because there are a few ways to do this, you can actually import the library file, I believe, into your Dorico project. You could also import back here on setup. If you go and add a single player, you can actually import the kit, right? And then I could go here and I could import this kit. I don't want to do that right now because I want to show you something. And this is because the purpose of my video here is certainly to illuminate how you can go about doing this reliably. But beyond that is to really educate everybody about how what's Dorico doing? Because unfortunately, there's some inconsistency, and some of it's actually really obscured from us. And the information I'm sharing is stuff that I've kind of discovered just by hook or by crook going through this and doing my best to figure out what the heck's going on. So let's just look at our instruments in here. And what you'll see is that under my family here, I have all these instruments, right? Because they were starred in my other project. Here they are in my new project. So I could create just a new percussion kit and add these manually. That would be time consuming, but it would certainly work and it would connect up my playback template, right? Right now, if I apply my playback template, the playback template's not going to find instruments with the right IDs. They might have the same name, and that's where this gets confusing, is that if I create a taiko drum and it's called taiko drum, and then I import it into a project, I could create another instrument also called taiko drum as far as the setup view and even staff labels, but it wouldn't have the same instrument ID, those weird numbers that we see when we are looking in the library manager. When we look in the library manager here and we look under our instrument data, right, we see these weird IDs like this. 1.5, whatever. But if we open it up, what we find is that it's a description of the 3 different note heads and articulations that I've configured with different drums, right? So that's instrument data that's stored in with this particular long number ID. It makes it unique, but it's kind of obscured from us, right? So then I've got this kit. Let's look at the drum set kit, what it contains. This is not the kit that I want, you know, this is just like a regular sort of rock drum kit. That seems to be the only thing that's different between my two projects. Percussion maps, it looks like my Taiko HST percussion map that I was using for all of my taikos in this case, that is not ported over, right? So I need to port that over right now. If I were to look at, let's just do this and say, I'm going to go ahead and import. Actually, I don't want to add another player. Sorry about the delay here. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to come up to my kit. I'm going to go import kit. I'm going to go find the Taiko HST. I've imported it here. You'll notice that it does not call it Taiko HST. This name here that I can double click and change is basically totally superfluous, so don't worry about that. But as you can see, it's actually created the kit for me, and these are all of my correct instruments, right? And if I were to go ahead and also look at the definition of my kit, you'd see that they have, let me look at one that has different hits. You see that it's imported my noteheads. Everything sort of looks good here, but what's the problem? Well, the problem is that right now, if I apply my playback template that I know contains my instrument, it doesn't load it up here. It doesn't load it up correctly. And that's because the playback template does not actually recognize these instruments I imported. And why is that? It's completely unintuitive, but if we go back to my instrument, now you see that I actually have duplicates of my drums. So these ones that are marked as 2-2 and 3-2, the ones with a 2 after them, those were imported as part of the doricolib. So in other words, because the drums were imported and they already existed, instead of syncing them up, Dorico created new drums, and those new drums have different IDs, so my playback template is not matching them up. Even though my playback template and my endpoint have been built correctly, even though I used the doricolib file to do the import and export, it should all match up, but it doesn't. And if I go into my setup for the kit here, and I look at my percussion kit, I go in and I look at these instruments, right? I could go ahead, let's just take the HST solo 10-inch here. If I were to look up HST solo 10-inch, I only have the 10-inch that is actually the one I starred in the previous project. That's the one I want, right? But the one that's in this kit is the 10-inch 2, I guess. So if we look at the library of instruments, we find that, go ahead, simplify this list. So we find that the drum is listed here, but it's not listed as in the score. And that is really an elemental part of this problem. So we have to go down a bit of a rabbit hole to really understand how to do this. But I want you to be rest assured that there are very reliable ways to transfer information using the library manager. Is probably the best way to do what you're trying to do. And in some cases, at least with the import of these projects as they are, you need to be aware that when you just import a kit, for example, it's going to create duplicates. Now, another option would be don't star your instruments so that they're not in future projects, but instead just export a library file, right? So if I were to go ahead and do that, and I'm actually curious to know if that will, what the outcome of that would be. So what I'm going to do, instead of going through a bit of a time waster, deleting all of that, I'm going to go ahead, hit don't save, create a new empty project. And this is actually me going through a bit of an experiment with you here, because I think this is an important thing to get to the bottom of. So we can see that in my instruments, I have my taikos right here, and I can even narrow down looking at my HST family, and I can see that they're all there, right? So if I were to select, what I'm going to do actually is go into my old project. So we know that the starring is conveying them into my other projects, but I'm actually going to undo that and see, we're going to explore this together, see if this actually has the desired impact. So if I go ahead in this project and I look at these instruments and I turn the star off, you notice how these all say in score. If they don't say in score in your project, even if you see them in setup and even if you can see them in the right mode, your playback template is probably not going to connect to them, even if all the names and all that stuff looks the same. It's very frustrating, but that's the way it is. If it doesn't say in score, that means that the unique instrument ID that is being used to identify that particular instrument is not going to be something that your playback technique, or sorry, your playback template is going to match. So what I'm doing here is I'm removing the stars simply because I want to be able to test whether or not doing the import without them being starred. In other words, it won't create duplicates because these instruments won't be in my new project. Okay, so I'm going to unstar these. I'm just going to double check that I've unstarred them all. That should work. Of course, if you're an experienced Dorico user, you know that that's only a should. I'm going to go ahead and save this project now. And then as soon as this closes up, we're going to create a new project, and we should expect to see that those instruments are not available. So I'm just creating a completely empty project. If I go up to Library and Instruments, it's taking a minute to load up. There it is. That's not actually what I wanted. So Library Instruments. All right. So we still have the family, but there's no drums in here. Okay. So now if I go to Setup and I import my kit, this time the drums don't already exist, right? They haven't been starred, so they don't exist in my instrument collection. When I import them, they won't have to create duplicates. So I get all my instruments here. Now if I go to Library and Instruments, what do I see? I don't see them assigned to the family, but I do see them, right? I do see them in here. And so let's do the big test, which is, will it connect on my playback template? So my playback template here, if I edit it, you can see that I have my percussion, my hybrid percussion. You can even look into that and see what it contains. You see how it now contains missing instruments. I'd imagine that that means it is not going to connect, but we're going to go ahead and give it a try anyway. See what happens. All right, so that did not work. And I think what it really reiterates for us is that the connection between drums and percussion instruments in one project into another relies on those instrument IDs. So what I'm going to do from this standpoint is I'm going to start having to look at what are those instrument IDs and are they matching up. Probably the easiest way to do that is back in the library manager. I can see. So I've got these instruments set up, right? But if I were to load up a Dorico project that I know has the right IDs, in other words, the project where I created the endpoint, I created my playback template from, that would reference the proper IDs. So I want to look at that information. So I'm going to go ahead to my endpoint project. I'm loading that up into my library manager. It's all loaded up. And I want to look at okay, this is interesting. So my percussion kit, there's one that's consistent. This is the one that's not the same, right? So this is telling me that in my project, I have this kit, but it does not exist in the other project. Percussion maps, I can see that I do have a matching percussion map, so that's good. My percussion map has come over. And then playback techniques, I think all the playback techniques I needed, the edge drums is the same. I used the rim, which is the same, and then natural, of course, which is the same. So actually maybe I'll go ahead. That's strange that natural was not correct there, but I'll go ahead and apply that to make sure that we have that set up correctly. Okay, so we've got percussion maps matched, percussion kits matched, instrument data not matched. Okay, so this project has a whole bunch of instruments in it that the percussion instruments, this one has these ones in red, which are part of the import. They have unique instrument IDs and they are not in the other project, right? So that's going to be a problem as far as getting the data to link up from my playback template. I'm looking at this over here and looking at how anything in my other project that's not consistent, how that might work. So unfortunately right now, we have been able to import the kit, but we have not been able to just easily connect it with a playback template. So here's what I would recommend: is import the kit. Well, actually, I would have two recommendations, two different paths to this. The first path would be star all your percussion instruments and then just create a kit and add the percussion instruments, in which case the playback template will load up because they have the same instrument IDs. That's the key: is do your instrument IDs match your playback template's endpoint. So that would be one path. Create a new kit and just add the instruments that have been starred, that are ported over. They have the same IDs. Okay. The other alternative is to import the kit. If it's really complicated, you've got lots of note heads, it could be the time-saving approach. But then you're going to just need to go in and do what you would do in the playback template, which is load the instrument manually, right? So basically come in here into the play menu, and I would just go here and create. In my case, I'm using this all on VE Pro, so I would go ahead and create a Vienna Ensemble Pro instance, connect it to my library like that, and then from there, I can go ahead and apply it. I can also go ahead and apply my percussion map, because that was very easy to import. So that would be the second approach, right? So just to review that, the first approach would be, and I guess it would make sense before I review those two approaches. Why would you do one over the other? If your kit's really complicated, you got a lot of note heads or a lot of instruments, then importing the kit and connecting it up in the play view would be the way to go, because connecting it up is going to be fairly time efficient. In my case with VE Pro, it would take a second, and then I don't have to rebuild or worry about configuring any of the kit pieces and that sort of thing. So that would be one approach if my kit was complicated. If the connections are complicated, but the kit's relatively simple, then probably what I would do in that case is star all the instruments, and then I would rebuild the percussion kit from those instruments. So I don't have to rebuild the instruments, but I just assembling them with my percussion player in setup mode, and then all of those user IDs will match, and I can go ahead and load my playback template, and it should fit right in. So I am coming away from this with one question myself that I want to answer and hopefully cover in a future live stream, and that is, how can we get consistency in the user IDs? Because this is also a problem with expression maps, where you might have an expression map that has the same, two expression maps have the same name, but they don't actually they're not recognized as the same thing by a playback template. The playback templates appear to use these really convoluted ID numbers to identify all their components. And if those ID numbers do not match up perfectly, then it's not going to match it up. So I'm going to look into that for a future live stream. How can we make sure that those user IDs are the same? But I think for right now, the way things are configured, at least I'm using Dorico 5. Perhaps it might be a little different in Dorico 6. Who knows? There are these two approaches. One, if you have a very complicated kit, then you import it and connect it to your instrument manually. The other is if you've got complicated connections, then just build the kit and you apply your playback template. Those would be the two approaches I would take. If you have questions about this, I'm sure many of you do. It's a confusing topic. I hope that you've learned about the root of this complication comes from these user IDs. I hope you've learned how to use the library manager to identify those IDs so you can at least visually match things up. You can see what's different between two different projects. I hope you've learned how to use doricolib files to export complex systems like everything from a percussion map, which could be very complicated, to a kit and all of its note heads and like so. Using doricolib files to back that stuff up and make it usable and transferable is also something I'm hoping we covered well. And if you have questions, I'm just going to take a quick look at my discussion here. So yes, Shubhas, you probably will have to watch this a couple of times if you want to get as familiar with it. I know that I have been through this process dozens and dozens of times. It's complicated. Using the library manager to explore the consistencies or inconsistencies between two different projects, between a kit in your old project and a kit in your current project, looking in the instruments dialog window to see if it's created duplicates when you have imported a kit is also kind of, these are just steps you can take that will deepen your knowledge, deepen your familiarity with how Dorico uses and organizes this information. I'm going to get to the bottom of how to keep those user IDs or those instrument IDs consistent from project to project, and hopefully follow up with that in a very soon upcoming live stream. Thank you so much for watching today. I hope everybody has a great weekend, and I will be back online next week, so I should, for the next 2 weeks, be on my normal schedule of Tuesdays and Thursdays. Thanks again. Please like and subscribe, share the video.